Plato's ancient whisper. You settle back into the gentle rhythm of your breath, letting the day's noise drift away like ripples disappearing across a still pond. In the dim twilight of your imagination, an old city slowly brightens marble columns, dusty scrolls, and the quiet hum of ideas floating in the air. You find yourself in ancient Athens, wandering through the shaded portico of the Academy, where the philosopher Plato often walked, teaching young minds to question the world. Tonight, though, you arrive just in time to hear something different, something not about politics or virtue or the shape of the ideal state. Instead, Plato is leaning forward, eyes softened with memory, sharing a story he claims is older than Greece itself. A story whispered through generations. He begins simply, almost casually, as if recounting a tale told to him by his elders. But there is a small tremor in his words, a hint of wonder that makes you lean in. He tells of a mighty island empire that once rose far across the sea beyond the pillars of Heracles in the deep Atlantic. A civilization filled with wealth, power, and incomparable knowledge. He calls it Atlantis. Discovery slips quietly into your mind. You picture a sprawling island, rings of land and sea, wide and concentric like ripples from a stone's throw. You notice something strange even in the first few sentences. So much precision, yet so little certainty. Plato insists the story comes from his ancestor Solon, the famous lawgiver who visited Egypt around 600 BCE. There the priests supposedly revealed this forgotten tale preserved in sacred halls. The detail feels too crisp for myth, yet too grand for simple history, and that contrast, the tension between clarity and impossibility, awakens that first spark of mystery inside you. As the last lanterns dim in the Academy courtyard, you sense yourself drifting deeper into the story. Plato describes Atlantis not as a fantasy, but as a record, an event remembered, not imagined, and this alone surprises you. Philosophers rarely claim such things. Plato often uses stories as metaphors or analogies, but here he insists upon a historical account. You find yourself asking questions without even meaning to. Why would a man so devoted to reason, so cautious in his use of myth, present this as fact? What compelled him to anchor a philosophical dialogue in a tale of catastrophic destruction? Did he know something we do not? Or was he crafting a symbolic tale so perfectly woven that it feels real? Your curiosity expands. You sense the contradictions in the air around you, like faint flickers of heat on stone. Plato places the fall of Atlantis at 9,000 years before Solon's journey, an impossibly ancient date in conventional chronology. Much earlier than the rise of Egypt or the earliest known civilizations, and yet the Egyptian priests in the story supposedly recited it from carved records or sacred scrolls. You wonder how such knowledge might have been preserved. Why would Egyptians, meticulous keepers of their past, remember a distant island empire across the sea while Greece, so proud of its memory, forgot entirely? Asking feels natural here. How much of this is history and how much is a philosophical tapestry? You listen following Plato's tone, noticing the odd blend of certainty and symbolism. You sense admiration inside his voice, too, admiration for that distant place he describes so vividly. A place with temples of silver docks, busy with ships' canals, etched in perfect order palaces, filled with ivory and precious metals. You can almost hear the faint echo of water lapping against the curved walls of those circular harbors. But then, as gently as it began, the story shifts. Plato tells how the Atlanteans grew arrogant, how their moral decline angered the gods, how earthquakes and floods swallowed the entire island in a single day and night of misfortune. The description is striking, too dramatic, too sudden. It doesn't match the slow ruin of history most civilizations undergo. It suggests something violent, catastrophic, almost volcanic, and that catches your attention. Did Plato borrow this imagery from Greek memory of natural disasters? Was it inspired by the eruption of Thera, the quakes that leveled cities across the Aegean? Or does it reflect something even older, something forgotten by archaeologists today? You hold that thought as the evening breeze stirs the leaves overhead. The mystery becomes clearer. Plato is the sole ancient source of Atlantis. No other Greek historian, Herodotus, Thucydides, Xenophon, mentions it. Not even Aristotle acknowledges it. This isolation makes the tale even more puzzling. If Atlantis had truly existed, especially as a mighty maritime power, surely more records would remain. And yet, their absence doesn't erase the possibility. Many Bronze Age civilizations vanished from memory for millennia before modern archaeology unearthed them. The Hittites were myth until tablets proved otherwise. Troy was legend until Schliemann found its ruined walls. Could Atlantis be another case where truth sleeps beneath deep water rather than deep sand? You feel yourself drifting into the uncanny space between doubt and possibility. Plato's narrative structure grows even stranger when examined closely. His description of Atlantis arrives in Timaeus, is expanded in Critias, then abruptly ends, cut off in mid-sentence, before explaining the final destruction. Scholars debate whether he simply never finished or intentionally left it incomplete, or perhaps even planned a third dialogue that vanished. You cannot help wondering why such an important story would be abandoned halfway. Did Plato lose interest? Did he hesitate to finalize details he wasn't fully sure about? Or did he intend to leave the tale suspended, just enough to provoke wonder, but not enough to close the door entirely? As these questions swirl around you, a subtle feeling arises, one of ancient echoes crossing vast distances of time. You imagine Solon standing in an Egyptian temple, listening to priests who spoke of cycles of destruction and rebirth. You imagine those priests drawing from older traditions, fragments of myths and memories passed down through cultures that rose and fell long before written history. And you sense something unusual here. Whether Atlantis existed or not, the idea seems rooted in something deeper than fiction. Some memory of a people washed away, or a city drowned, or a continent reshaped by sudden, violent forces. Yet as you follow this line of thought, the truth remains elusive. No convincing proof has ever surfaced. No inscriptions naming Atlantis. No ruins matching Plato's rings of land and water. No artifacts from a lost Atlantic empire. And so you are left with a paradox, a detailed description with no evidence, a compelling tale with no corroboration. The mystery grows heavier like mist settling over the sea. You exhale gently, allowing the uncertainty to settle comfortably beside you. Perhaps that is precisely where the story belongs, not as history, but as a doorway. A doorway into the faint memories of cultures long gone, or into the symbolic landscape of Plato's philosophical imagination. Yet still, the possibility lingers, the possibility that behind the contradictions lies something real, something the ancient world remembered only faintly, something modern humanity has not yet uncovered. And so you rest with the simplest question, why did Plato tell this story at all? Until now, no one has been able to answer that convincingly. The memory of Solon's journey. You drift deeper into the quiet cradle of night, letting the world around you soften until only the sound of your breath remains steady, gentle, like the tide exhaling against a distant shore. In that comfortable stillness, you imagine yourself stepping into the sandals of an old traveler, a wise man wandering through ancient lands in search of knowledge. The man is Solon the Athenian lawgiver, revered for his insight and calm judgment. Tonight you follow him far from the familiar hills of Greece to a place where the desert wind carries a history older than any Greek chronicle, the ancient city of Sais in Egypt. The halls of the temple are cool and dim. Columns rise like petrified trees painted with stories of gods, kings, and forgotten ages. Solon walks slowly, respectfully, guided by priests who claim to possess records stretching back thousands of years. As you watch him move through this sanctuary of memory, you feel the first tingle of discovery, because it is here, in this very place, that Solon is said to have heard the tale of Atlantis for the first time. You sense the atmosphere shift as the high priest begins to speak. His voice echoes softly in the stone chamber, neither hurried nor hesitant. He looks upon Solon with a mixture of amusement and sympathy. "O Solon, Solon," he says, "you Greeks are always children. You know nothing of the ancient catastrophes." The remark startles you, and you feel Solon's humility in the way he bows, slightly accepting the rebuke. The mystery deepens immediately. Why would the priest say such a thing? What does he believe the Greeks have forgotten? Curiosity rises warm and steady. You watch Solon's expression shift, first surprise, then fascination, then a quiet eagerness to understand. The priest continues recounting a world swept many times by fire and flood civilizations, rising and disappearing like sand patterns erased by wind. Then, without warning, he speaks of a powerful island nation beyond the pillars of Heracles, an empire so advanced and wealthy it once challenged the ancient ancestors of Athens. That empire, he says, was Atlantis. You feel a quiet awe settle over you, the kind that comes when ancient voices reveal something far older than expected. Solon listens intently, asking questions. And in this dialogue you sense something unusual. The priest seems to be correcting Greek understanding of the past. He speaks of ages long forgotten, of catastrophes that destroyed records, and memories of cycles of rebirth that left only fragments of truth behind. You wonder how much of this reflects genuine Egyptian tradition, and how much reflects Plato's philosophical framing. But either way, the effect is the same. You feel the weight of a story too old for most cultures to remember. As the priest describes Atlantis, the details flow with remarkable consistency. He speaks of a grand island, larger than Libya and Asia, combined, divided into concentric rings of land and water. He describes a proud civilization, ruled by kings descended from the god Poseidon. He recounts a web of influence stretching across the Mediterranean and a sudden cataclysmic end brought by an overwhelming natural disaster. These are not vague hints, but structured memories, complete with measurements, geography, and political organization. And yet, something feels strangely out of place. You find yourself asking how such a detailed account could survive 9,000 years. How could records endure through countless invasions, dynasties, and cultural shifts? The Egyptian priest insists they do. But you sense an underlying tension. Egyptian chronology, as we know it, doesn't stretch back that far with clarity. Their earliest kings did not rule tens of thousands of years ago, despite what legendary king lists occasionally suggest. You feel uncertainty tightening around the edges of the tale like mist gathering on a morning river. You linger for a moment on the brilliance of Solon's character. He was famous not just for wisdom, but for his desire to understand, to learn from foreign cultures. His journey to Egypt is historically recorded, though the specifics remain uncertain. You imagine him writing down fragments of what he heard, perhaps planning to adapt the tale into a great poetic work he never completed. And that raises another question: if he intended to share the story with Greece, why did he stop? Was the memory too overwhelming? Did the narrative defy translation into Greek poetic form? Or did he simply run out of time before death claimed him? The more you explore, the more the contradictions multiply gently around you. The Egyptian priests of Sais belonged to a temple dedicated to the goddess Neith, a deity often associated with creation and ancient knowledge. Yet there is no surviving Egyptian record explicitly describing Atlantis, no hieroglyphic inscription, no papyrus scroll, not even a myth that mirrors it closely. The silence of Egyptian evidence hums in the background, making the priest's tale even more mysterious. Was Plato drawing from some fragmentary tradition now lost? Or was he using Egypt as a symbolic stage, a place known to the Greeks as ancient, timeless, and wise? You find yourself admiring the craftsmanship of the story even as it confounds you. Solon in Plato's dialogues is more than a listener. He becomes a bridge, a link between civilizations, between distant memories, and philosophical reflection. His role adds gravitas to the origin of the tale. It gives Atlantis a historical anchor. And yet, it also invites doubt. Because if the story came solely from Plato's imagination, placing it in Solon's hands would shield it from criticism. You sense how delicate that balance is. Whether Atlantis was real or symbolic, Plato chose Solon deliberately. Then comes the moment that captures your imagination more than any other. The priest explains that the ancient Athenians once defeated the Atlanteans in a great conflict before both civilizations were destroyed. This is not just an account of a sunken island. It is a story of moral triumph, where a virtuous, modest people overcame a decadent, arrogant empire. You feel the philosophical echo here, a parable hidden inside a history lesson. And yet even parables sometimes conceal real memories beneath their layers of meaning. As you rest in this quiet temple scene, your thoughts drift like dust swirling in a shaft of light. You sense the heavy stone walls around Solon, the scent of incense, the cool touch of ancient floors beneath his sandals. You imagine his mind absorbing details that would later reach Plato, transformed, magnified, or perhaps faithfully preserved. And you wonder gently whether anyone alive today can separate truth from embellishment. What remains undeniable is this: the story Solon heard in Egypt would later become the foundation of one of the world's greatest mysteries. But the chain of transmission, Egyptian priest to Solon, Solon to his family to Plato, creates many places where memory could shift, fade, or grow. Did Solon truly hear this tale, or did Plato craft it to explore ideas of ideal states, moral decay, and natural destruction? Scholars still cannot say. No proof either way has ever been convincing. As you let your thoughts rest, one possibility rises softly, like the glow of dawn on the horizon. Perhaps the Egyptian priests were remembering something real, a memory of a civilization destroyed so long ago that all trace of it slipped beneath the seas and sands, leaving only stories carried by survivors. Or perhaps Solon heard only a faint echo, one that Plato reshaped into something grander. No one has ever resolved this mystery. A maritime empire of impossible scale. You ease deeper into the quiet of the evening, feeling your breath settle into a slow, soothing rhythm. The world around you softens as if the edges of reality loosen just enough for you to drift into another age, an age painted not with faint brushstrokes, but with vivid, almost impossible grandeur. Tonight, as you follow the thread of Solon's tale through Plato's words, you begin to see Atlantis not only as a mystery, whispered from Egypt, but as a place described in startling, overwhelming detail. The first sensation is one of awe. Plato does not sketch Atlantis vaguely. He describes it with precision, its cities, its harbors, its fields. You picture a vast island, larger than anything known to the ancient Greeks, lying beyond the pillars of Heracles. Its capital city sits at the island's heart, arranged in perfect concentric rings of water and land, each connected by bridges, canals, and great gates. The image forms gently, almost architecturally, inside your mind, 3 rings of ocean, 3 rings of earth, and in the center, a sacred island crowned with the temple of Poseidon. As you stand in that imagined space, the discovery begins. You see gleaming walls, one lined with bronze, another with tin, and the innermost ring shimmering with fiery red orichalcum, a metal Plato calls second only to gold in value. You let your imagination touch those shining surfaces. You picture the harbor filled with thousands of ships. You sense the movement of carts and horses, soldiers in polished armor, and merchants carrying goods from distant lands. It is breathtaking. But soon a quiet, subtle confusion rises. The scale seems too vast, too intricate, too advanced. You feel your brow crease slightly as you begin to notice the contradictions. How could a Bronze Age civilization possess such immense infrastructure, massive canals, deep harbors, complex irrigation, and monumental architecture, surpassing anything found in the Mediterranean at the time? Even the mighty Minoans, with all their skill, did not build cities laid out with such mathematic perfection. You find yourself murmuring internal questions not out of doubt, but curiosity. Was Plato describing a real place? Was he exaggerating real features of known societies? Or was he piecing together symbolic geography rings, like the ripples of creation, myths, metals that reflect social class or spiritual qualities? You drift further into this strange calm, wondering how much of the description was intended literally. Plato gives measurements, precise lengths of canals, distances from one ring to the next, the number of ships the harbors could contain. Yet the numbers feel impossible. The main canal alone, according to the text, was said to be more than 100 feet deep and wide enough for multiple triremes to pass. Such engineering would surpass anything in the ancient world. And this sparks a gentle but persistent wonder inside you. Why would Plato go into such elaborate detail for something purely imaginary? The question lingers like a faint echo over still water. Then you sense another layer of surprise, one woven not through numbers, but through Atlantis's political structure. The empire consists of 10 kingdoms each, ruled by a son of Poseidon. They live in harmony, governed by laws carved onto a pillar of orichalcum in the central temple. They meet every 5 years or every 6, depending on whether they chose to honor odd or even cycles to offer sacrifices and decide matters of justice. The system is organized, structured, clearly defined, strangely defined. You begin to feel a subtle tug, something that suggests Plato may be using Atlantis to mirror or critique systems he saw in Greece. The idea is intriguing. But just as you settle into that reflection, the story shifts again. Plato insists Atlantis commanded a vast realm stretching from the Atlantic to parts of Europe and northern Africa. Their navy was enormous, their armies numbering in the tens of thousands. They possessed technologies, resources, and agricultural systems unmatched in the ancient world. Yet again, no archaeological record supports such a sprawling empire. No ruins, no written documents, no surviving artifacts. The absence feels almost louder than the description itself, creating a soft tension between what Plato claims and what history has uncovered. The contradiction grows, but so does the mystery, because despite the lack of physical evidence, parts of the description seem strangely familiar. You recall the Minoans of Crete with their powerful fleets and advanced palaces. You remember the city of Carthage with its circular harbor eerily resembling the ringed structure of Atlantis. You think of Egyptian depictions of foreign maritime powers. Each comparison reveals similarities, but none match perfectly. You let these parallels swirl softly through your mind like painted fragments drifting in calm water. Was Plato combining features of multiple cultures into one symbolic place? Or did he draw from older forgotten stories, stories that might have come to Greece from seafarers who witnessed lands now submerged or ruined? Then an even deeper question arises: why would Plato describe Atlantis as an empire of impossible richness, only to destroy it in a single night? Why emphasize extravagance, order, beauty, and power, only to obliterate it instantly? The thought stirs something inside you, a sense of philosophical purpose. Perhaps Plato intended Atlantis to represent the dangers of hubris, the moral decay of a people blessed with too much. Or perhaps he was recalling distant memories of real disasters, volcanoes, earthquakes, floods that erased entire cultures without warning. You picture the island trembling, the earth splitting apart, a towering wall of water rising. Plato's destruction scene feels vivid, almost cinematic. It mirrors natural catastrophes known to the Aegean world. The eruption of Thera had devastated Minoan settlements centuries before Plato wrote. Could this memory, transmitted through oral tradition, have inspired the sudden annihilation of Atlantis? Or was the story meant to reflect the unpredictable wrath of the gods? You exhale slowly, feeling the weight of these questions settle into a calm but insistent curiosity. With every detail you consider, the mystery deepens rather than resolves. The description is too elaborate to dismiss as simple fiction, yet too fantastical to accept as straightforward history. Atlantis sits in the peculiar gap between myth and memory, between allegory and archaeology. And as the imagined waves roll gently beneath the island's concentric harbors, you sense a lingering possibility, a whisper that perhaps Plato was drawing from fragments of a real civilization, one whose ruins now lie hidden beneath layers of sediment or submerged on forgotten continental shelves. But no evidence has ever surfaced. No city with circular harbors, no temples lined in orichalcum, no canal system matching the description. The silence of the archaeological record remains unbroken, and so as you lift your gaze to the distant horizon of this ancient maritime empire, you are left with a soft, unsolved question. Was Atlantis truly a marvel of the ancient world, or a philosophical mirror crafted to reveal human nature? No one has yet found the answer. Geological clues beneath the sea. Night settles a little deeper around you, warm and forgiving. And as your thoughts drift, you feel yourself guided far from the bustling harbors and gleaming palaces of Plato's Atlantis. The noise of human civilization fades, replaced by the long, slow murmur of the ocean. You listen to that ancient voice, steady, rhythmic, older than any temple or myth, and you sense that the next step in your search for Atlantis lies not in old books or crumbling scrolls, but in the planet itself, in the silent record of stone water and the restless crust beneath the world's oceans. You begin with a simple image, a map of the Atlantic, the one you've seen 1,000 times, but now you look at it differently, almost as if you're gazing through the eyes of an ancient explorer. The continents cradle the ocean on both sides like massive, uneven bookends. The sea between them hides landscapes deeper and more dramatic than anything on land, vast mountain ranges, plunging trenches, and broad plateaus. And here in the sway of darkness, the discovery takes shape. Directly down the center of the Atlantic runs the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a titanic volcanic chain stretching from the Arctic to the Southern Ocean. You imagine it as a fiery scar, a boundary where the earth splits and new crust rises. This ridge has been rising and falling for millions of years, shaping the seafloor with slow but irresistible force. Some have looked at it and wondered, could Atlantis have once stood near this shifting frontier? Could an island formed by volcanic uplift have been swallowed again by the hungry sea? The idea is strange, yet strangely compelling. You picture an island born from rising magma, its slopes cooling and hardening, forming a landmass large enough for life. Over time, the plates drift, the crust weakens, perhaps collapses. You sense the possibility, at least in theory, that land could emerge and disappear. But as you sink into the calm of the night, you also sense the complexity. Geological change happens slowly. Islands do not rise and vanish in a single day and night, as Plato wrote, at least not usually. Your thoughts glide like a submersible along the ocean floor. You approach the Azores Plateau, a region of unusually shallow seafloor, dotted with volcanic islands. The Azores archipelago rises from it, green and mist-covered. Some researchers have wondered whether this elevated plateau could be the remnant of a larger landmass. You imagine walking across the Azores, hearing local legends of sunken lands and lost kingdoms. Their stories echo faintly against Plato's description. And yet, despite the mystery, no ruins have ever been found beneath the waves here. The ridge is active, but the geological evidence does not clearly support the sudden drowning of an entire continental island. Still, the curiosity grows. You glide across another region, this time the Celtic Shelf, where parts of northwest Europe once extended much farther before rising seas consumed the land after the last ice age. There was Doggerland, the vast plain that connected Britain to continental Europe, now submerged beneath the North Sea. People lived there, hunted there, built homes there, and the sea rose, washed over everything, erasing a world. Suddenly, the idea of a vanished land no longer feels so impossible. You think of how rising seas could swallow coastlines within lifetimes, how entire villages could vanish in storms, and how survivors might weave these events into myths. But still nothing exactly matches Plato's description. Your journey sinks deeper. The ocean grows colder, darker. Cast your mind now to the Sargasso Sea, the still mysterious patch of ocean near the center of the Atlantic. Early sailors called it strange, haunted, lifeless. The calm waters and floating seaweed felt unnatural, as if the ocean were hiding something beneath. But sonar has revealed nothing more than sediment and a few ridges of ancient volcanic rock. You feel the questions returning. Why did Plato place Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles, a phrase used commonly for the Strait of Gibraltar? Why not closer to Greece? The location seems purposeful, yet puzzling. Greece had no record of an Atlantic empire, no voyages westward that would justify this geography. And yet something about the Atlantic's restless geology, the fault lines, the volcanic arcs, the deep basins, makes it the perfect stage for a civilization swallowed by the sea. You pause, letting the stillness settle again, then drift toward another clue, the Canary Islands and Madeira, perched on volcanic hotspots just off the coast of Africa. Ancient sailors navigated around them. Plato's description of warm breezes, fertile plains, and abundant resources echoes the climate of these islands. And yet, like the Azores, no evidence of an advanced pre-Bronze Age civilization lies hidden beneath their coastal shelves. And so the uncertainty grows not as frustration, but as a gentle, intriguing fog. You drift deeper into the Earth's geological secrets, exploring the idea of seamounts mountains beneath the sea, some rising nearly to the surface. Many were once islands during glacial periods when sea levels were much lower. You imagine a large seamount rising high enough to host people-animal structures, then slowly submerging again as oceans rose. The concept fits pieces of Plato's story, but not all. No known seamount is large enough to match the colossal island he described. And then with a slow turn, you arrive at the most fascinating possibility of all catastrophic events. You think of landslides the size of mountains, such as the Storegga slide off Norway, which sank enormous portions of land and sent mega tsunamis rolling across the North Atlantic 8,000 years ago. Ancient coastlines were erased in hours. You think of volcanoes like Thera capable of obliterating entire settlements at once. You consider how earthquakes can cause coastal plains to drop suddenly below sea level. These events, though rare, are powerful enough to reshape history. Could a society have lived on a coastal plain, rich and advanced, only to be annihilated by such an event? Could survivors scattered across the Mediterranean have carried fragments of memory that evolved into Plato's Atlantis? The possibility holds you for a long moment, soft, haunting, but plausible. Yet the evidence refuses to resolve. No drowned city beneath the Atlantic, no lost continent beneath the waves, no definitive geological match to Plato's tale. And still, a final thought rises as softly as a tide touching the shore. The ocean keeps its secrets well. For most of human history, the deep sea was unreachable. Even now, vast stretches of the Atlantic remain unmapped. Entire mountain ranges lie hidden beneath the dark. If a city, a kingdom, or a civilization had once perched on a coastal shelf now submerged, would we even know? Would we have looked in the right places? You let that question rest beside you, quiet and unresolved. The geological clues offer hints, suggestions, parallels, but no certainty. And so, like Atlantis itself, the truth lies somewhere beyond sight, buried in rock water and the unyielding silence of the sea. Echoes of the Bronze Age collapse. You relax deeper into the soft quiet of the evening, letting your breath settle like a slow tide, pulling gently away from the shore. As the world around you dims, you feel yourself drifting into a new landscape, one made not of shining metal rings or sunken islands, but of real ancient cities, real upheavals, and real mysteries, whose echoes still shiver through the archaeological record. Tonight you slip back into the chaotic centuries around 1200 BCE, a time historians simply call the Bronze Age collapse. It begins with a strange sensation, as if many threads of history suddenly unravel at once. You stand on a distant shoreline and feel the trembling of something vast beginning to fall apart. In Greece, the proud palaces of Mycenae and Tiryns falter. Across the sea, the Hittite Empire, once ruling lands from Anatolia to the edge of Syria, crumbles into dust. In Egypt, Pharaoh's right of invaders arriving from the midst of the sea. The city of Ugarit sends desperate letters for aid only to be destroyed before help arrives. Everywhere walls crumble, settlements burn, and the careful systems of trade and diplomacy that once supported the ancient world collapse like a string of toppled stones. You sense an immediate and unsettling discovery. This collapse occurred so suddenly, so widely, and so catastrophically that even today, no single explanation satisfies historians. The pattern is unmistakable. Something enormous swept across the Mediterranean, leaving entire civilizations broken. And this sweeping disaster happened thousands of years before Plato wrote about Atlantis. The surprise arrives gently, almost without warning. As you stand in the ruins of these once mighty cities, the parallels with Plato's tale begin to flicker. He spoke of a civilization that grew proud, powerful, and wealthy, only to be destroyed in a single catastrophic event. And here in the archaeological record, you see cities, abandoned palaces, burnt trading empires, vanished, and memory itself disrupted. Could fragments of these real events have filtered into later stories, eventually shaping the tale of Atlantis? You let your thoughts explore that possibility, moving slowly through the landscape of the collapse. You imagine the sea people's mysterious warriors who appeared in Egyptian records wearing feathered helmets, attacking by ship, and bringing chaos wherever they landed. No one knows exactly who they were or where they came from. Some theories suggest displaced populations from the Aegean. Others hint at internal rebellions, famine-driven migrations, or victims of natural disasters seeking new lands. Their identity remains unknown. You pause curious. Could the memory of this seafaring, destructive force have merged with myths of an aggressive maritime empire like Atlantis? Did later generations remember these invaders as remnants of a fallen power? Or were the sea peoples themselves responding to some catastrophe of their own, a homeland lost, swallowed by the sea, forcing their desperate migration? Your mind drifts gently to the Hittites, whose grand capital at Hattusa was abandoned and destroyed around this same period. Their empire had stood for centuries, organizing complex trade networks and diplomatic ties. Its sudden end remains largely unexplained. Earthquakes, famine, internal revolt. Foreign invasion scholars still debate the cause. You can almost feel the tremor of uncertainty that surrounds these events, a silence stretching across 3,000 years. Then you move to the ancient city of Ugarit. The final letters recovered from its archives speak of ships approaching hostile unknown and of urgent pleas for help that never arrived. The city fell within days. Ash and rubble covered its streets. Nothing survived. You sense the fear in those last messages, the abruptness of the destruction. And again the echo of Atlantis reaches you, a flourishing place, brought to ruin swiftly and mercilessly. But deeper questions stir as you explore these ruins. Unlike Atlantis, these cities did not sink beneath the sea. Their stones still lie on land, waiting to be studied. Their destruction was real, yet not sudden in the supernatural way Plato described. And yet, the exact forces remain uncertain. A combination of climate collapse, drought, earthquakes, migrations war, and breakdown of trade networks likely played roles. But no single cause ties everything together neatly. You sense the complexity of the collapse like a tangled web. It refuses to be solved just as Atlantis refuses to be found. Now you begin to see the broader pattern. When civilizations fall abruptly, their stories do not end with their ruins. Survivors carry fragments of memory, stories of destruction, lost homelands, vanished cities. They recount them to their children who retell them across generations. Over centuries, memories blend with myth, shaped by fear, wonder, and imagination. Could the story of Atlantis be such a memory, a distillation of many ancient catastrophes? You imagine displaced people fleeing collapsing kingdoms, moving across the sea in search of safer shores. You imagine them carrying with them tales of once wealthy homelands, now burned, abandoned, or drowned. These stories might have reached Egypt, where priests gathered traditions older than the pyramids themselves. Perhaps they preserved echoes of real disasters that happened long before written Greek history. The thought is gentle, plausible, and still tinged with mystery. And yet, another part of you senses the limits of this idea. The Bronze Age collapse was widespread, affecting many lands. Plato, however, describes a single powerful kingdom destroyed in a sudden cataclysm. Could he have compressed centuries of destruction into a single dramatic moment? Could he have transformed a centuries-long geological and political collapse into a symbolic event, one day and night of misfortune? No answer rises. Instead, a soft ambiguity floats around you like dust motes turning in a shaft of light. The more you explore, the more the lines blur between history and myth. You walk again through the silent ruins of Mycenae, the great Lion Gate still standing its stones, worn smooth by time. The palace within lies broken, its rooms burned. No one knows exactly why. You touch the stones in your imagination and feel the weight of lost memory. Civilizations far stronger than Atlantis, far better documented, can still vanish into mystery. And this realization leads you to a quiet reflection. Plato was a philosopher, not a historian. He lived long after the Bronze Age collapse. Any memories he received through Egyptian priests, Solon, or other traditions would have been shaped by centuries of retelling. Myths grow, contract, and transform. If even the collapse of entire empires could be forgotten, then perhaps Atlantis was once part of a real story that drifted into legend. But tonight, in the calm between one breath and the next, you rest with a final thought. The world Atlantis describes proud, wealthy, powerful, then suddenly destroyed mirrors the fate of many Bronze Age societies. The pattern is real, yet no specific civilization matches Plato's tale perfectly. And so you leave this chapter with a soft, unresolved curiosity, knowing that historians still debate these connections, and the sea of uncertainty remains vast. The Enigma of Thera, Santorini. You drift once more into the soft hush of night, letting your mind settle into that peaceful space where history feels close enough to touch. The sea around you grows calm again, dark and polished like obsidian. As your thoughts drift across its surface, a shape begins to form beneath the water, a circular island broken, and scarred a wound carved by fire. Tonight you journey not to a mythic land, but to a real place, a place whose violence reshaped the ancient world, Thera today known as Santorini. You step into this landscape gently, as though approaching the edge of a sleeping volcano. The crescent-shaped island cradles a vast caldera, a sunken basin left behind by one of the largest eruptions in human history. The cliffs rise steep and sheer, their layers of red and white ash stacked like the pages of an ancient book. Beneath your feet lies a record of destruction, one that echoes uncannily with Plato's tale of Atlantis disappearing in a single day and night. The discovery comes slowly, like the glow of dawn. Around 1600 BCE, Thera exploded with such force that ash blanketed the eastern Mediterranean. The eruption hurled tens of cubic kilometers of rock into the air, produced titanic tsunamis, and sent shock waves across continents. It shook the land, broke coastlines, and may have scattered entire communities. This is not speculation. It is written clearly in geological layers that scientists have studied for decades. And as you imagine that eruption, a quiet shiver travels through you. The timing predates Plato by 1,000 years. But the violence, the suddenness, the catastrophic nature, it feels eerily similar to the destruction he described. You begin to feel the surprise, the fascination that has captured scholars for generations. Many have wondered whether the memory of Thera's eruption, preserved in fragments of myth and oral tradition, could be the seed from which the Atlantis legend sprouted. The idea is not new, but it carries a hypnotic charm. You picture sailors hearing stories of a once beautiful island that exploded and vanished beneath the sea. You imagine survivors telling their children who told their children's children until the tale drifted across centuries, transformed, but not forgotten. Yet as you walk further into this volcanic landscape, questions begin to drift into your thoughts, subtle but insistent. Could Thera truly have matched Plato's description of Atlantis, a vast island empire with concentric harbors, canals, and brilliant palaces? Or was the island far too small, too isolated, too different from the fantastical world Plato described? You pause imagining the ancient Minoans who once thrived on nearby Crete. Their art shimmers with delicate dolphins, leaping bulls, flowing robes, and symbols of maritime strength. Their cities, Knossos, Phaistos, Zakros, reflect a sophistication that amazed early archaeologists. When the Thera eruption struck tsunamis, devastated Minoan ports, ash blanketed their fields, and the shock may have destabilized their world. You sense a growing connection forming gently in your mind. A powerful maritime culture deeply connected to the sea suffers a sudden, overwhelming disaster. Their decline follows. The echoes of their collapse reverberate for centuries. Could Greek memories of the Minoans blended with Egyptian recollections of ancient calamities have shaped the broader myth of Atlantis? But just as this idea begins to fit into place, another part of you senses its limits. Plato's Atlantis was said to be in the Atlantic Ocean, not the Aegean. Its size was enormous, far larger than Crete or Thera. And its destruction was tied to moral decay, not just natural disaster. The match is suggestive, but incomplete. You let your imagination sink deeper, descending into the archaeological site of Akrotiri, the Minoan city preserved under the ash of Thera. The streets lie silent but remarkably intact. Walls still stand. Frescoes still glow with vibrant colors. Pottery remains where people left it. And yet the city appears eerily abandoned before the eruption occurred. No bodies, no chaotic debris, no signs of a sudden, unexpected flight. This detail surprises you. Did the inhabitants know the volcano was waking? Did they see the signs, earthquakes, ashfall, rumbling, and evacuate? If so, where did they go? No records tell their fate. They vanished into history as silently as the city they left behind. And this silence creates another layer of mystery. A civilization fractured by disaster, its people dispersed, its memory carried by survivors. This is exactly the kind of historical trauma that gives birth to myths of lost worlds. You wonder whether their descendants might have told stories of a once great island, overwhelmed by fire, and sea stories that journeyed through generations until they reached Plato, reshaped into philosophical narrative. But then your thoughts drift toward another unsettling question. Thera's eruption was devastating, but did it truly sink the island beneath the waves? No, most of it remained above water, though reshaped violently. The core collapsed into a caldera, but large portions of land survived. Plato's Atlantis, on the other hand, disappears entirely, leaving no trace behind. And so you find yourself balancing possibilities like smooth stones held in the palm of your hand. On one side, the uncanny parallels a circular volcanic island, a sudden cataclysm, a maritime culture deeply intertwined with the sea, and a collapse that echoed across the Mediterranean. On the other side, the mismatches, the size, the location, the political structure, the moral narrative, the timing. You feel the gentle tension, the mystery held between these two sets of clues. It is neither solved nor dismissed. It simply floats in the space between certainty and imagination. Now you drift farther outward, imagining seafarers centuries after the eruption. They would have passed by the shattered cliffs of Thera, hearing stories from locals, stories of a great island that erupted in fire, of waves that reached distant shores, of settlements buried beneath ash. Perhaps these tales traveled to Egypt, where priests preserved ancient calamities. Perhaps they reached Greece, where the memory of the Minoans still lingered. But over centuries, memories distort, distances stretch, details warp. A powerful island becomes an empire. Ash becomes moral downfall. A volcanic collapse becomes divine punishment. And a real disaster becomes a legend of impossible grandeur. Yet even as these possibilities whisper through your thoughts, the final truth remains out of reach. Archaeologists have studied Thera for decades. They have uncovered stunning artifacts, buildings, and frescoes, but no evidence of a city matching Plato's Atlantis has emerged from its ash. Nothing proves a direct connection. And so, as you let your breath slow once more, you accept the gentle uncertainty. Thera is real. Its destruction was real. Its impact was profound. But whether it lies behind the Atlantis story, no one has ever answered with certainty. You rest with one last thought. The earth remembers its catastrophes more clearly than people do. And perhaps in the quiet spaces between myth and memory, Atlantis is the echo of a disaster humans once knew and then forgot. Minoan splendor and sudden silence. You drift deeper into the soft, velvety quiet of the night, feeling your thoughts glide from the volcanic cliffs of Thera to a place that once shone like a jewel in the ancient Aegean, the island of Crete, home of the brilliant Minoan civilization. Tonight you step gently into their world, a place alive with color, rhythm, and the pulse of a people whose daily life seemed woven from the very fabric of the sea. At first you feel only awe. The discovery begins when you imagine yourself standing before the grand palace of Knossos. Its red columns rising boldly, its walls alive with murals, leaping dolphins, acrobatic youths, vaulting over bull scenes of harbors filled with ships. This is not a shadowy ruin. In your mind's eye it breathes. You see artisans carving intricate seal stones, scribes marking clay tablets, and priests tending to sacred shrines. The air hums with music and the scent of fresh-cut timbers carried from distant lands. The Minoans seem unlike any other ancient people you have encountered. Their art radiates movement and life rather than stern hierarchy. Their architecture spills outward, sprawling instead of imposing. Their ships glide across the Aegean, linking Crete with Cyprus, Egypt, the Levant, and mainland Greece. They command the sea so completely that later Greeks believed they were the first great naval power in history. And then slowly the first threads of surprise begin to weave through this picture. For all their brilliance, for all their connections, the Minoans left behind no monumental walls, no fortresses, no defensive ramparts. You notice this absence, and it startles you. Why would such a wealthy and exposed civilization leave itself unprotected? Did they feel invulnerable? Did they rely on diplomacy, trade, or religious influence rather than war? Or did they possess a naval power so strong that no enemy could threaten their island? The question lingers unanswered as you walk deeper through the imagined corridors of Knossos. Frescoes shimmer like reflections on water. Long stone corridors twist from room to room, leading you through storerooms, workshops, ceremonial spaces. The palace seems less like a fortress and more like a living organism growing organically over centuries. And then a shift occurs softly, at first like a faint tremor beneath your feet. You begin to sense the quiet fragility beneath the splendor. Archaeologists have long believed that the Minoans began to decline in the centuries after the Thera eruption struck, by tsunamis weakened by economic strain, perhaps shaken by political unrest. But the records are fragmentary, the evidence incomplete. Entire layers of Minoan history vanished or burned. Their script, Linear A, remains unreadable to this day. This silence inside their past mirrors the story of Atlantis in a way that feels uncanny. You pause and listen. In the distant imagined coastline, you hear the murmuring of waves against ancient harbors. You sense ships setting sail, traveling routes the Minoans had dominated for centuries. But something has changed. Their confidence in the sea wanes. Their settlements show signs of stress. Their outer ports, once bustling with trade, begin to falter. Slowly the edges of their world darken. You feel yourself drawn deeper into the mystery. Was their fall caused by the Thera eruption alone? Many experts doubt it. The timing doesn't match exactly. The decline seems too prolonged. Perhaps famine played a role. Perhaps earthquakes shook their island repeatedly. Or perhaps new rivals from mainland Greece, Mycenaean warriors, eventually overwhelmed them. You hold all these questions, gently letting them drift like floating lanterns along a dark river. There is no single explanation, no clear cause, only fragments. And yet, one thought begins to rise unexpected and oddly captivating. The Minoans seem to embody part of what Plato described about Atlantis, a maritime civilization, brilliant, wealthy, deeply connected to the sea, and suddenly undone by disaster. Their palaces were filled with advanced plumbing, storage systems, vibrant art features far ahead of their time. Their influence spread across the Mediterranean. Their decline was sudden enough, dramatic enough, that Greek memories may have preserved distorted traces of it. This is where you begin to sense admiration turning into inquiry. What if the Minoans were one of the inspirations behind Atlantis, not the whole, just a layer, a thread, a memory softened by centuries of retelling? But then comes the gentle contradiction. Plato describes Atlantis as lying beyond the pillars of Heracles, far out in the Atlantic Ocean. Crete is not there. The Minoans never lived in the Western Sea. Their island never sank beneath the waves. Their palaces did not vanish suddenly in one night. The inconsistencies are real, and they whisper a reminder that the past rarely fits neatly into legend. You wander farther through Minoan ruins this time, not in imagination, but as archaeologists have uncovered them. You see rooms filled with charred remains, pottery shattered by earthquakes, walls collapsed by fire. You sense the vulnerability of a civilization that seemed, for all its beauty, strangely unprepared for calamity. Their abandonment of key sites happened quickly in some regions, slowly in others. There is no single moment of destruction, no one catastrophic night. And yet, as you breathe in the silence of these ruins, a deeper thought rises. Sometimes civilizations vanish without leaving behind a clear explanation. Sometimes the reasons are lost, buried, forgotten. This realization touches the heart of the Atlantis question. The Minoans were real. Their greatness was real. Their decline was real. And yet their story, too, is veiled in mystery. You imagine ancient Greeks, centuries after the Minoans fell, visiting the ruins on Crete. They would have seen huge palaces, massive columns, storerooms, large enough to feed armies, and frescoes, revealing a culture unlike anything they knew. They may have wondered how such a place could fall. They may have woven stories around the ruins, stories that grew with each generation. These stories could have traveled to Egypt, to Plato, to Solon, each telling adding details, shifting geography, blending real memory with imaginative embellishment. But this is where the ambiguity rests. No direct link has ever been proven. No document says the Minoans were Atlantis. No archaeological site perfectly matches Plato's description. Nothing conclusively ties Crete to the legend. You feel that gentle, familiar sensation, now the one that has followed you through every chapter of this journey so far. The mystery remains unsolved. The evidence is suggestive but incomplete. The clues shimmer like reflections on water, tantalizing but impossible to grasp fully. And still, a final quiet thought lingers. If a civilization as advanced as the Minoans could rise, flourish, and fall, and then leave behind so many unanswered questions, what else might have existed beyond the maps, beyond the memories, beyond the reach of written history? You rest with that thought, letting it drift in the calm of the night. Egypt's records and the missing empire. You breathe gently, letting the slow rhythm of the night settle around you like a warm cloak. The waves of earlier chapters have carried you from volcanic islands to fallen kingdoms, but now they guide you toward a quieter kind of mystery, one found not in ruins, but in absence. Tonight you step into the cool stone corridors of ancient Egypt, the land of scribes, priests, and record-keepers, to search for something that should be here, yet isn't the record of a mighty Atlantic empire. The discovery begins softly, like a lamp being lit in a dark archive. Egypt kept meticulous histories, temple carvings, king lists, papyri, inscriptions, etched into stone that has endured millennia. Their scribes recorded flood famines, invasions, alliances, astronomical events, religious rituals, and even regional gossip. If a vast civilization like Atlantis once rose, challenged, and fell, surely these halls should hold some trace of it. And yet, as you run your fingers along the imagined walls, you feel nothing but smooth stone and carved hieroglyphs describing the affairs of the Nile. The chronicles speak of Nubians, Libyans, Canaanites, Hittites, and mysterious sea peoples, but never a sprawling kingdom beyond the pillars of Heracles. They speak of storms, wars, and cosmic cycles, but not a land swallowed whole by the sea. It is a silence that feels almost intentional. The surprise deepens when you recall Plato's claim that Solon learned about Atlantis from Egyptian priests in Sais, a city dedicated to the goddess Neith. According to Plato, they possessed ancient records describing Atlantis in great detail. You look around the halls of Sais, at least in your imagination, seeing priests in linen robes tending to shrines lit by flickering lamps. These priests, Plato insists, told Solon that the Greeks had forgotten their own past, while Egypt had carefully preserved it. This raises a gentle but unsettling question. If Egypt preserved everything, where are these records now? No inscription found in the ruins of Sais mentions Atlantis. No papyrus has surfaced to confirm the tale. No tomb paintings reference a powerful western island kingdom. The Egyptian archives are rich, but they remain silent. You feel curiosity stirring slow and measured. Was Plato inventing the Egyptian connection to lend authority to his story, or did he rely on traditions, now lost records destroyed by time fire war or the slow erosion of papyrus? As you step further along the temple walls, another layer of curiosity emerges. Egypt's history spans thousands of years, divided into dynasties, kingdoms, and interregnums. But their approach to history differs from modern chronologies. For the Egyptians, myth, cosmology, and history often blurred. King lists stretched the past into remote ages, sometimes describing rulers who lived for hundreds of years, names more symbolic than factual. It is possible that ancient priests spoke of cataclysm, cycles of destruction, or vanished lands in mythic language. Solon, hearing these tales, may have interpreted symbolic narratives as literal history. Plato, inheriting them generations later, might have expanded them further. You sense the delicate interplay between memory and myth. Egypt preserved the past but also transformed it. Their stories of creation involved floods and cosmic oceans. Their tales of early ages described gods walking among men. Their understanding of time was cyclical, not linear. Perhaps Atlantis was hidden in these layers, buried not in stone inscriptions, but in cultural memory, encoded in myths that Solon misunderstood. But then, as the quiet deepens around you, another possibility gently tugs at your thoughts. Egypt's archives, vast though they were, suffered catastrophic losses. Fires, invasions, religious upheavals, and the relentless passing of time destroyed countless scrolls. The Library of Alexandria burned. Papyrus decayed. Temples were plundered. What if the records did exist, just not anymore? The idea settles softly beside you like a forgotten bookmark slipping into an ancient text. Yet the contradictions do not vanish. Egypt recorded contact with numerous foreign lands: Byblos Punt, Nubia, Syria, Cyprus, the Aegean Islands. Their art depicts foreigners with distinctive clothing, hair, and ships. But no scene shows a people resembling Plato's Atlanteans, no fleet of ships from a Western empire, no ambassadors bearing tribute from beyond the known world. This silence is heavy. It presses gently against the edges of your imagination. You wander further into the shadows of these imagined halls, feeling the coolness of stone beneath your fingertips. You reflect on how much Egypt remembered and how much it may have forgotten. You think of the destroyed city of Avaris, once capital of the Hyksos, now swallowed by silt for centuries before being rediscovered. You think of the Amarna period, almost erased intentionally from Egyptian history. If entire dynasties could be forgotten, why not stories of distant lands? Curiosity stirs again. If the Egyptian priests did tell Solon about Atlantis, what was their source? Plato claims they spoke of cycles of destruction caused by fire and water disasters that wiped away Greek memory repeatedly. Egypt, protected by stable Nile cycles and favorable geography, survived these cataclysms, preserving records that others lost. You imagine the priests speaking solemnly of ancient ages, their words drifting across the centuries, until Plato shaped them into the Atlantis narrative. Perhaps they were referencing the end of the Ice Age, the flooding of coastal plains, or forgotten stories of islands lost to tsunamis. Perhaps, in their view, These tales were symbolic reflections on the nature of cosmic order. But Plato presents them as historical fact. This discrepancy deepens the mystery. Was Plato misunderstanding his source, or deliberately blending myth and history for philosophical effect? You sit with that uncertainty, letting it settle like dust in a shaft of soft morning light. And then a final thought rises, quiet but compelling. Egypt's silence on Atlantis does not prove the civilization never existed. It simply means Egypt did not record it, or that if they did, those records vanished long ago. Many ancient cultures left no written history at all. Their stories survive only through the faint hints of archaeology. Entire peoples have disappeared without a trace. Atlantis, if it existed, could have been one of them. But another more skeptical thought follows, equally soft. A civilization as vast as Atlantis, larger than Libya and Asia, combined, according to Plato, should have left a mark somewhere. In Egypt, in Greece, in the Levant. But it left none that we can find. And so the question remains unresolved, shimmering quietly in the dim light of these ancient corridors. Did the Egyptian priests truly describe Atlantis to Solon? Or was it a philosophical narrative shaped by Plato, given weight by the wisdom of Egypt? The silence offers no answer, only a gentle reminder that some mysteries linger because the past refuses to speak. The Pillars of Heracles and the Mapping Paradox. The night drifts deeper, soft as velvet, and your breath settles into a slow, even rhythm. The world outside grows quiet, and you feel yourself gliding once more into the dimly lit corridors of ancient memory. Now you follow Plato's words toward a place that has puzzled scholars for centuries, a geographical riddle at the heart of the Atlantis mystery, the Pillars of Heracles. You begin with the discovery, gentle and curious. The phrase, "beyond the Pillars of Heracles," appears throughout classical literature. To most Greeks, it meant a very specific place, the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow passage between Africa and Europe, where the Mediterranean Sea opens into the vast Atlantic. You imagine ancient sailors approaching this threshold. To them it was the end of the known world, a gateway framed by steep cliffs, the Rock of Gibraltar, rising to the north, Jebel Musa, standing to the south. Crossing these waters must have felt like stepping from familiarity into the abyss. Plato claims that Atlantis lay far beyond this point in front of the strait in the Atlantic Ocean. That placement is bold, decisive, and entirely unprecedented. No Greek historian, before or after Plato, ever mentioned a civilization in the Atlantic. This is where the surprise sets in. The geography seems both precise and puzzling. Greece had no contact with Atlantic cultures. Their ships rarely sailed beyond Sicily, Crete, Cyprus, and the coast of Anatolia. Even Carthaginian voyages to the Atlantic were exceptional and shrouded in secrecy. Why would Plato choose a location so far outside Greek experience? And why does his description of the region, the vast plain, the gentle slopes, the massive island match, no known geography west of Gibraltar? You begin to sense the paradox unfolding slowly, like a map unfurling across a wooden table. Ancient Greek geography was often symbolic, tied as much to myth as to measurement. Places were described with both literal and metaphorical intent. You recall how Homer spoke of Oceanus, the world-encircling river, and how early Greek maps pictured the world as a circular disk, with continents shaped according to storytelling needs rather than precise observations. Was Plato doing something similar, or was he referencing real ancient maritime traditions now lost to history? Your curiosity draws you deeper. The phrase pillars of Heracles did not always have a single, fixed meaning. In earlier centuries, some poets placed them near the coasts of Libya or even the Aegean. Some linked the pillars to shrines, others to natural landmarks. In certain traditions, Heracles traveled through the Aegean and carved pillars metaphorically wherever he passed. This opens a new question, one that stirs faintly inside your thoughts. Did Plato mean Gibraltar at all? Or did he refer to a location closer to Greece, one the ancient audience would have recognized differently? Scholars have debated this for generations. Some argue that the pillars once referred to the straits near Crete, or even the entrance to the Black Sea. If so, Atlantis might have been placed far closer to the Aegean, changing the entire geographical puzzle. You feel the mystery thickening? If Plato meant Gibraltar, then his geography points to the open Atlantic, an area mostly unknown to ancient Greeks, and largely free of archaeological evidence for an advanced Bronze Age civilization. If he meant some other location, then the story shifts dramatically, pulling Atlantis back toward regions like Crete, Thera, or even North Africa. But none of these possibilities solve the puzzle completely. You imagine ancient map-makers drawing their worlds. Their coastlines curve gently, imprecisely. Regions expand or shrink according to knowledge or legend. Unknown lands are filled with creatures or left blank. Plato's own understanding of global geography was based on limited exploration and stories passed along by sailors. He could not have known the shape of the Atlantic seabed or the existence of the Americas beyond. Yet his description of Atlantis, a giant island larger than Libya and Asia combined, makes the mapping paradox even sharper. The Atlantic is enormous, but no island of that scale exists, nor geological evidence of one existing in the late Ice Age. Sea levels were lower, then exposing continental shelves, but nothing approaching the size Plato claimed. You pause, letting the soft contradiction settle over you like mist. How could Plato describe a land that did not exist using geography that only partially made sense? Perhaps the story was metaphorical, a symbolic island of cultural memory. Perhaps the geography was exaggerated for dramatic effect. Or perhaps, as some argue quietly, Plato inherited a tale that contained fragments of very ancient knowledge distorted by time. You trace the Strait of Gibraltar in your mind again, picturing ancient sailors clinging to their knowledge as they entered the unknown. Beyond this passage lay mystery, fear, and imagination. Legends of sea monsters, whirlpools, and endless waters filled the minds of those who dared to venture westward. If stories of lost lands existed, this is where they would have lived, in the hazy boundary between known and unknown. Now your curiosity leads you further to Carthage. Long before Plato's time, Carthaginian traders were known to have explored parts of the Atlantic coast, including journeys along West Africa and possibly the Canary Islands. Their voyages were rarely shared, guarded as trade secrets. Some Greek writers hinted that powerful Atlantic cultures existed, or that strange islands lay far offshore. Could Plato have drawn from rumors of these lands? Could early Iberian or North African traditions have spoken of flooded plains, drowned coastlines, or vanished islands? The possibilities whisper through your mind, soft as the breeze over a calm sea. But then comes the gentle contradiction, the one that pulls you back into uncertainty. Even if Plato borrowed from older seafaring traditions, none describe a circular city of impossible engineering. None mention a continent-sized island swallowed whole by the waves. None align neatly with his tale. You begin to feel the soft tension between imagination and geography, between mythic symbolism and literal interpretation. Atlantis lives in this space, in the gap between maps drawn by logic and maps drawn by story. And yet, as you rest in the quiet of this moment, another idea begins to glow faintly. The pillars of Heracles represented a boundary and edge where the known world met the unknown. To place Atlantis beyond them was to place the story in a realm half real, half mythic, a realm where ancient memories of lost lands could linger without contradiction. Perhaps Plato chose this location deliberately not to mislead, but to evoke the sense of a world beyond human reach, a space where forgotten civilizations might once have lived, and where the oceans now guard their secrets. But the paradox remains. If Atlantis lay beyond the strait, its ruins should lie somewhere on the Atlantic seabed, and yet none have been found. No harbors, no temples, no canals, no rings of land and sea. The maps remain blank, and so, with all the care of a philosopher pondering the unknown, you rest in the quiet uncertainty. The pillars of Heracles guide the story outward, but offer no answers. The mapping paradox persists, silent, unresolved, and endlessly compelling. The lost lands of the Atlantic. You let the night settle a little deeper around you like a gentle tide pulling softly at the edges of your awareness. The world grows quiet, and the sea of the past grows wide before you, vast, ancient, and filled with secrets the surface no longer reveals. Tonight you follow the faint whispers of places the ocean has taken, back lands that once stood beneath open sky, now buried under rolling waves. In their stories you sense faint reflections of Atlantis, echoes that draw you deeper into the realm of unsolved mysteries. You begin with a discovery that feels almost unreal. The Atlantic Ocean, though seemingly timeless, was not always as we know it. Thousands of years ago, during the last ice age, sea levels were over 100 meters lower. Great swaths of land now drowned beneath the ocean were once dry plains where people lived, hunted, built homes, and told stories around fires. The coastline stretched far beyond today's boundaries. As this understanding settles slowly into your thoughts, the first sense of wonder blooms. Entire landscapes, forests, hills, and valleys now lie beneath the waves. They are not fantasies, but geological facts confirmed through sonar mapping and sediment analysis. The ocean has swallowed worlds before, and it will do so again. You drift gently across the map of the ancient Atlantic basin and begin to notice patterns that stir curiosity. There are drowned river systems beneath the sea, submerged cliffs where once waves broke, vast continental shelves that once held life. And within these regions lie places whose stories carry hints, small, incomplete, but suggestive of lands lost to time. Your mind wanders first to the Azores, a cluster of volcanic islands rising from a plateau deep in the Atlantic. Today they stand alone, wind-swept and rugged, yet the plateau beneath them sits surprisingly shallow compared to the rest of the Atlantic. Some researchers in the early 20th century speculated, though without conclusive evidence, that this plateau might once have supported a much larger landmass before parts of it sank or eroded away. Submarine ridges, odd rock formations, and abrupt undersea cliffs have fueled speculation for generations. Nothing found there proves the existence of Atlantis, but nothing entirely rules it out either. You drift farther southwest, letting your imagination glide along the peaks of underwater mountains known as seamounts. A few rise so close to the surface that ancient mariners may have glimpsed them as islands. Over millennia, volcanic activity or rising seas submerged them once more. These ephemeral islands, appearing, disappearing, and appearing again across deep time, carry a haunting weight. They show how easily a land could exist for a while, flourish, and then vanish. You feel the surprise grow stronger when you reach the story of Helike, though not in the Atlantic, but in the Greek world. A prosperous city swallowed by an earthquake and tsunami in 373 BCE, it vanished so completely that for centuries people believed it was myth, until archaeologists uncovered it in the 1990s, preserved in layers of silt. Its sudden destruction mirrors Plato's description eerily, a thriving city gone overnight. Its story warns you that entire settlements can disappear without leaving a trace for thousands of years. If Helike could vanish in an instant, could other coastal cities along ancient Atlantic shores, now long forgotten, have disappeared the same way? You feel the question linger like a soft breath against your ear. Then your thoughts glide northward toward the cold waters of the North Sea, where the most striking example of a lost land once stretched a vast region called Doggerland. 15,000 years ago, Doggerland connected Britain to Europe. It held rivers, lakes, forests, and human communities. When the Ice Age ended, melting glaciers raised the seas, flooding this enormous plain. By around 6000 BCE, Doggerland was gone. Entire cultures vanished beneath the water. For thousands of years, people forgot it existed. Only in the modern era did scientists rediscover it through fishing nets filled with ancient bones, through sonar scans, revealing riverbeds beneath the waves, through peat and clay deposits, preserving remnants of long-lost settlements. Doggerland is real. It was drowned. It was forgotten. And its rediscovery proves something simple and profound. The ocean has devoured entire human worlds before. This realization sits with you quietly, stirring both comfort and unease. The idea of a lost land, once inhabited, later forgotten, no longer feels like fantasy. It feels like a pattern written into the earth itself. You drift south now toward the Canary Islands, where stories of sunken lands echo through local myths. The ancient Guanche people spoke of Atlantida and other lost homelands swallowed by the sea. These tales, though impossible to verify, suggest ancient memories of rising waters, volcanic collapses, or earthquakes reshaping the region. Then your thoughts shift westward to the Caribbean, where indigenous stories speak of lands lost to floods and storms in distant ages. Though far removed from Plato's narrative, these stories reveal how deeply cultures remember the trauma of catastrophe and how those memories transform across centuries. As you drift through these echoes of the past, a new question gently rises. Could these real lost lands, Doggerland, the submerged Azores Plateau, vanished islands near Africa, have formed the deep mythic foundation of stories that ultimately reached Plato? Not in detail, but in theme, a great land, drowned an ancient world, lost to memory, eroded by time. The possibilities feel soft, diffuse, yet somehow meaningful. They suggest that Atlantis may not be one lost land, but many its legends shaped from fragments of real geological events scattered across millennia. A composite memory. But then the contradictions emerge, calm but insistent. None of these lands were continental-sized as Plato described. None possessed the impossible concentric harbors, the orichalcum-lined walls, the 10 royal districts, the enormous central plain. None match the moral allegory embedded in Plato's text. They resemble Atlantis only in one essential feature. They disappeared beneath the sea. You sit with this truth, feeling its quiet weight. The parallels are compelling, but incomplete. The evidence tantalizing, but inconclusive. The ocean's silence remains unbroken. You take one last mental journey descending into the dark Atlantic depths, into a world that remains more than 80% unexplored. You imagine vast plains in the deep sea, untouched by human eyes. You picture cliffs and canyons larger than anything on land. You wonder if a forgotten shoreline, or the ruins of a settlement, or some unexpected structure might still lie hidden beyond the reach of current technology. The thought settles gently beside you. If Atlantis, or something like it, ever existed, the Atlantic is vast enough to hide its remains even today. And yet, until something is found, the mystery endures, patient, silent, complete. Atlantis in the eyes of early explorers. You ease deeper into the stillness of the night, letting your breath match the quiet rhythm of the sea. The waters around you seem to stretch across centuries, reflecting not only ancient myths, but the dreams and ambitions of those who came long after Plato. Tonight you drift into the era of early explorers and map-makers, men who gazed into the horizon, armed with courage and curiosity, and wondered whether Atlantis might lie just beyond the reach of their ships. Discovery arrives softly, like the creaking of a wooden mast in a gentle breeze. For most of the ancient world, the Atlantic Ocean was a place of fear, a mysterious expanse where the known world ended. But by the Middle Ages and Renaissance, that fear had begun to blend with fascination. Mariners whispered of islands rising from the mist of lands glimpsed only once and never found again, of shorelines that appeared on maps, mysteriously, sometimes without explanation. You imagine standing on the deck of an early Portuguese caravel, its triangular sails catching the wind as it moves westward from the coast of Africa. The horizon is vast, the ocean deep and unpredictable. In this age of exploration, the idea of Atlantis began to stir in the minds of sailors. The more they traveled, the more questions arose. What lay beyond? Were there lost lands hidden by storms, swallowed by waves waiting to be rediscovered? Curiosity gently grows as you explore the journey of Christopher Columbus. Before he sailed west in 1492, he studied ancient texts, maps, and legends. Some of these documents referenced unknown islands or remnants of ancient civilizations. He was aware of Plato's Atlantis and considered whether the lands he sought might connect to that old story. When he reached the Caribbean, he believed he had discovered territories mentioned in classical writings. Though often mistaken in his geographical interpretations, Columbus helped revive the idea that ancient myths could point toward real places. Then your mind drifts toward the strange and haunting maps of the Renaissance era. These were crafted by scholars, priests, travelers, and sometimes by imaginative storytellers. One figure stands out: Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit scholar of the 17th century, who published one of the earliest known maps of Atlantis. His diagram beautifully illustrated places Atlantis in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, south of the Azores. It is drawn as a large island, fractured by a cataclysm, its shape marked by mountains and rivers. You study the map in your imagination the way Kircher rotated it, so south was at the top, north at the bottom. His version of Atlantis was not based on archaeology or geology, but on reading Plato literally and merging that interpretation with the geographic knowledge of his time. Yet his map influenced many thinkers and explorers, making them believe that a real landmass once existed where only ocean now remains. This is where the surprise begins to form. Many explorers, even those with scientific backgrounds, believed Atlantis was not entirely mythical. The boundaries between myth and geography were blurry. Mariners relied on charts filled with speculation. Map makers included islands based on rumor or hearsay. And so the story of Atlantis began to weave itself into the early attempts to map the Atlantic. You visualize other forgotten or phantom islands that appeared on medieval and early modern maps: High Brazil, St. Brendan's Island, Antilia, and others. Some were placed west of Ireland, others north of Africa, and a few near the Caribbean. These islands, later proven non-existent or misidentified, reflect how easily imagination blended with navigation. Perhaps sailors saw mirages, volcanic eruptions, floating pumice rafts, or simply the tricks of fog and light. Yet each mysterious island fed the idea that unknown lands still waited to be discovered, and that Atlantis could be one of them. As curiosity deepens, you consider the explorers who went further into speculation. The Spanish chronicler Francisco López de Gomara wrote in the 16th century that the Americas themselves might be remnants of Atlantis. The similarities in climate size and resources tempted him to connect the continents to Plato's description. Others proposed that Native American civilizations, from the Maya to the Aztec, descended from Atlanteans who escaped the island's destruction. These theories were flawed and ethnocentric, shaped by misconceptions about indigenous cultures. Yet they reveal something important. The story of Atlantis was powerful enough to influence how Europeans interpreted the world they were newly discovering. It became a lens distorted but captivating through which explorers tried to map unfamiliar places. Still, the contradictions soon reveal themselves like reefs beneath calm water. The Americas, though vast, do not match Plato's description. Their civilizations have long histories of their own, entirely independent of Greek legend. The geographic features are different. Their origins trace through real archaeological records, not lost islands. And so the connection dissolves. You breathe in the quiet uncertainty as another possibility arises. Perhaps explorers sought Atlantis not to prove its literal existence, but because it symbolized something deeper, a longing for a forgotten golden age, a hope that civilization had once been more perfect, more unified, more harmonious than the fractured world they knew. Atlantis became an ideal, a dream of perfection, destroyed by its own pride. For explorers, it was a reminder that greatness could be lost and may be found again. You drift now toward the early scientific expeditions of the 19th century, when naturalists and oceanographers began mapping the Atlantic seafloor. Some believed they found evidence of submerged plateaus, volcanoes, or drowned land masses that could have supported Atlantis. The Atlantis Plateau, great meteor seamount, and other features excited imaginations. But none offered proof. No ruins, no inscriptions, no artifacts. The ocean floor held its secrets. Still, these early efforts marked an important shift from explorers seeking Atlantis with ships and hearsay to scientists seeking it with instruments and data. Even then, the results remained inconclusive. You sense the unresolved tension at the heart of this history. Explorers dreamed of Atlantis because they wanted it to be real. They traced it onto maps, into journals, into stories. Yet the more the world was explored, the more it became clear that if Atlantis ever existed, it was not easily found. And so you rest with the lingering thought that early explorers did not solve the mystery, they deepened it. They pushed the boundaries of the known world outward, but Atlantis remained just beyond those boundaries, always retreating, always hidden. In the quiet of the night, a final reflection settles softly. Atlantis is a mirror. In each age, people see what they hope for or fear. For explorers, it symbolized lost lands waiting to be rediscovered. For philosophers, it was a moral lesson. For scholars, a puzzle. For storytellers, a dream. And for you in this gentle moment, it remains what it has always been. A mystery just out of reach, waiting in the dark waters of the imagination. Strange artifacts and misplaced civilizations. You let the darkness settle a little more gently around you, like a soft blanket draped across your shoulders. The sea of history grows still again, its surface smooth and patient, as moonlight glides over it. Tonight your path takes you not to shattered cities or drowned coastlines, but to something quieter and more puzzling objects, artifacts. Strange finds from across the world that don't seem to fit neatly into the timelines or cultures where they are discovered. They whisper of lost knowledge, forgotten travelers, and civilizations whose stories may have been erased or folded into myth. The discovery begins with something simple, a sense of dislocation, an artifact that appears in the wrong place, a tool made with techniques not known to the culture where it is found, a symbol or inscription that resembles writing from a distant land. These objects are rare, controversial, and often misunderstood, but they remain deeply compelling. You imagine yourself standing in a quiet museum room long after visitors have gone home. Glass cases glow softly, shadows fall across pottery shards, bronze blades, carved stones, and fragments of ancient scripts. You lean toward them, noticing details that scholars still debate. Some artifacts seem to hint at cross-cultural contact earlier than textbooks suggest. Others appear so unusual that they fuel speculation about lost civilizations, forgotten migrations, or knowledge that somehow slipped through history's fingers. One of the first mysteries that floats into your mind is the Piri Reis map drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. It includes surprisingly accurate coastlines of South America, drawn long before European explorers had charted them fully. Some have claimed the map reflects older unknown charts, perhaps dating back to antiquity. But as you rest with the idea, you feel the gentle skepticism settle. Nothing proves its origin extends beyond the medieval world. The map is strange, intriguing, but not conclusive. Then your thoughts turn to objects buried in places they shouldn't be. For a moment you imagine pulling a shard of Roman pottery from soil in Brazil or discovering a Viking coin in a Native American settlement far from known Norse roots. Such finds, though rare and often explained through trade drift into the public imagination as whispers of lost voyages. But none of these anomalies, none of these accidental minglings suggest the existence of an empire like Atlantis. Still, the curiosity grows. You consider the Antikythera mechanism a complex Greek device centuries ahead of its time, a bronze machine with gears and astronomical calculations so sophisticated that modern researchers compare it to an ancient computer. It reveals that ancient peoples possessed knowledge far more advanced than we once assumed, and in that realization, a soft surprise settles around you. If one artifact like this exists, how many others have been lost? And yet, the Antikythera mechanism was Greek, not Atlantean. It fits into a real cultural context, even if it redefines it. It shows brilliance, not impossibility. You let your imagination drift further across continents. In South America, the Nazca lines stretch across desert plains, vast geoglyphs depicting animal shapes and straight lines extending for kilometers. Some early writers, fascinated by their scale, proposed unlikely explanations, lost cultures from across the sea, or civilizations with forgotten engineering knowledge. but modern archaeology shows they were built by the Nazca people with meticulous planning and simple tools. Again, the mystery is intriguing but grounded. Not Atlantis. Then you picture the Bimini Road, a formation of large rectangular stones lying underwater near the Bahamas. Early explorers in the 20th century speculated that it might be the remains of massive walls or causeways, evidence of a sunken city. The shape seems deliberate at first glance. The stones resemble building blocks. The layout seems patterned. But as you sink deeper into the calm analysis, the contradiction rises. Geological studies suggest the formation is natural beach rock fractured and shaped by natural processes. The Atlantic can produce illusions of architecture, just as wind and water shape desert rocks into seemingly carved forms. Still, the Bimini Road remains one of those places where belief lingers. Some visitors swear it feels ancient, intentional. Others see nothing more than nature's handiwork. The tension between the two feelings mirrors the entire Atlantis story. You breathe slowly, following this gentle oscillation. Many artifacts and sites once touted as Atlantean have other explanations. The Yonaguni Monument off Japan likely shaped by tectonic fracturing. Out-of-place artifacts like crystal skulls, revealed as modern forgeries. Giant megaliths around the world, triumphs of human engineering, not evidence of lost supercivilizations. Each mystery dissolves under scrutiny, yet each leaves behind a small residue of wonder, a sense that the ancient world was full of surprises far beyond what textbooks reveal. Then, amid this quiet room of mismatched objects, another thought rises wrapped in gentle uncertainty. Some artifacts truly resist interpretation, not because they hint at Atlantis, but because they represent cultures we still barely understand. The Olmec colossal heads carved from massive basalt stones appear suddenly in Mesoamerica without clear precursors. The Indus Valley script remains undeciphered. The Sphinx of Giza triggers debates about erosion patterns that some say suggest greater age than commonly accepted. None of these mysteries point directly to Atlantis, but they remind you that human history is not fully mapped. The gaps are large. The unknowns are real. And in those gaps, Plato's story feels strangely at home. You reflect quietly on the possibility that objects alone cannot prove a lost civilization. Even if Atlantis existed, its material traces might lie buried beneath sediment, coral, or tectonic shifts. The ocean floor preserves some things and erases others. Wooden ships rot. Clay tablets dissolve. Entire coastal cities might vanish without leaving a single recognizable artifact. You let that realization settle softly. Atlantis may not be revealed through a mysterious object in a museum case. It may require something larger, an underwater ruin, a submerged plain, a discovered inscription, a harbor layout, unmistakably matching Plato's description. None of that has been found, not yet. Still, you hold the thought that the ancient world contained more than we know. Civilizations rose and fell. Knowledge appeared was lost, then rediscovered centuries later. Objects surface in places that make scholars pause, reconsider debate. This alone keeps the door open, not wide, but slightly ajar. The artifacts do not prove Atlantis, but they remind you that history is incomplete, fragile, easily broken, and that perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest secrets remain hidden, not because they never existed, but because we have only explored a fraction of our world and an even smaller fraction of our past. You rest in the soft space between wonder and skepticism, where unanswered questions feel strangely soothing, modern expeditions and the deep unknown. You allow the night to settle even more softly around you, as though the world itself exhales and grows still. Somewhere far below the surface of the vast Atlantic light disappears entirely. Darkness presses in. Cold currents slide past underwater cliffs. And in that abyss, machines hum quietly, modern eyes searching ancient depths. Tonight you drift with them into a place untouched by sun or memory, where the quest for Atlantis continues not through legend or philosophy, but through science, technology, and the boundless curiosity that still carries humanity forward. The discovery begins with a gentle hum. Imagine the slow glide of a submarine prowling the ocean floor. Floodlights cut through blackness, revealing slopes of basalt ridges shaped by volcanic eruptions, and endless plains of silt that hold secrets millions of years old. In the last century, explorers, oceanographers, and archaeologists have sent countless vessels into the deep searching for signs of a sunken city, straight lines, carved stones, temple shapes, harbor walls. You picture them small crews in cramped steel shells, scanning sonar images, reading computer screens lit blue in the darkness. Each journey carries the faint hope of discovering something impossible. Perhaps a wall, a foundation, columns, pathways, anything. Yet the ocean offers only mystery. Your curiosity deepens as you drift beside a modern research ship, its deck glowing softly beneath the night sky. These vessels tow instruments behind them, side-scan sonar arrays, magnetometers, underwater drones. They sweep back and forth across enormous regions of the seabed, mapping terrain once invisible. Mountains rise in startling shapes. Valleys plunge deeper than the Grand Canyon. But even with this precision, the ocean reveals less than expected. You follow the sonar beam as it pulses into the depths. The data returned shows patterns sometimes suspiciously geometric. You lean forward, your heart stirring with anticipation. But when the drone descends, the shapes turn out to be natural formations, fractured basalt, pillow lava, or sediment patterns that mimic human structures. The ocean loves to play tricks. This is where the surprise grows. Natural formations can look eerily artificial when seen through sonar or low-resolution imaging. Straight lines emerge from shifting sand. Rectangles appear where volcanic rock splits along weaknesses. Underwater ridges can seem like walls. Even coral formations can resemble columns or broken pathways. These illusions have fueled countless claims of underwater cities from the Azores to the Caribbean to the mid-Atlantic ridges, yet detailed exploration repeatedly shows nature's handiwork rather than an ancient architect's. And yet, you cannot help feeling awe at how easily the ocean disguises itself. Your thoughts slide now toward specific expeditions. In the 1970s, researchers aboard the vessel Glomar Challenger drilled core samples from the Atlantic floor, analyzing sediments for signs of a sunken continent. The results showed layers of volcanic and oceanic crust, not continental rock, contradicting claims of a lost landmass. Then came the Marine Geology project using high-resolution sonar that revealed immense underwater mountains and deep trenches, but no ruins. Still, each expedition left a lingering possibility. The ocean floor is vast, enormous, beyond imagination, and much of it remains unmapped in detail. You feel the pull of this idea, gentle but strong. Even with modern instruments, we have explored less than a tiny fraction of the deep sea. The abyssal plains stretch for thousands of kilometers. Underwater landslides create chaotic landscapes. Sediments bury structures in days, sometimes hours. If a city once stood along continental shelves, now submerged by rising seas, It could easily lie under layers of sand and silt invisible to sonar. Curiosity nudges you further as you join another imagined expedition, this one exploring the waters around the Azores. Some researchers believe the region's underwater volcanic plateaus might once have supported islands much larger than those visible today. Oceanographic teams have scanned the region for decades, finding volcanic cones, collapsed calderas, lava flows. These features paint a story of violent geological change, land rising and falling sometimes dramatically. But again, no ruins, no carved stones, no ancient harbor walls. The contradiction presses softly against your thoughts. Every modern search seems to push Atlantis further into impossibility, yet never quite closes the door. The deeper we probe the ocean, the more we realize how little we know. Your mind drifts to the submerged formations in the Mediterranean, though far from Plato's Atlantic setting. In places like Pavlopetri Baia and the Gulf of Cambay, entire underwater cities have been found, real ones, proving that ancient settlements can indeed vanish beneath the sea and sleep there for thousands of years. Pavlopetri lay hidden for nearly 5,000 years until divers stumbled upon its streets. Baia, submerged by volcanic activity, preserved Roman villas and statues beneath calm waters. These sites remind you that lost cities do exist, but none match Atlantis. You breathe slowly, letting the tension dissolve. Perhaps Atlantis, if it existed, lies not in the deep abyss, but on a continental shelf, just outside reach, buried beneath layers of sand in shallow waters between Europe and Africa. Some archaeologists have suggested this possibility quietly. Coastal plains flooded at the end of the last ice age. Could an entire settlement, maybe not the elaborate empire Plato described, but something older, lie beneath 10 or 20 meters of water? Maybe. And then comes the deeper, more philosophical surprise. Many modern scholars believe the true search for Atlantis is not a search for a place, but a search for origins. Why does this story captivate us so deeply? Why do explorers, sail scientists, dive, and scholars debate for hundreds of years over a city described only once in 2 dialogues by a philosopher who loved allegory? Atlantis represents something larger than geography. It embodies the human longing for a lost golden age, a world where people lived harmoniously until pride undid them. It symbolizes the fragility of civilization, the reality that even the greatest cities can fall overnight, swallowed by forces beyond their control. And it speaks to the idea that history hides more than it reveals. As you reflect in the quiet darkness, the ocean floor drifting silently below, a gentle contradiction emerges. Science has mapped the Atlantic's vast ridges and plains. Philosophy has explored the meaning of Atlantis for millennia, and explorers have searched every corner of the horizon. Yet Atlantis remains unclaimed by all of them, teasing mysterious unresolved. The deep ocean remains a realm of shadows. The tools grow more advanced. The questions remain the same. You rest with the softest thought, one that feels like the calm before dawn. If Atlantis ever existed, it may lie where human eyes have never reached, beyond the beams of submersibles, beyond the maps, beyond even our modern imagination. Or it may never have existed at all, except as a story crafted to guide minds toward wisdom. Either way, the mystery remains whole. A civilization beyond memory. You settle into the soft quiet of night, letting your breath fall into a steady, peaceful rhythm. The long journey you've taken across oceans, through ruins, past volcanic islands, into archives and laboratories, begins to gather around you, forming a single gentle circle of thought. Tonight you stand at the threshold between myth and history, looking back at every fragment of the Atlantis mystery, feeling how each one glows faintly in the darkness. None bright enough to illuminate the whole story, none so dim that they can be forgotten. It is here, at this edge of understanding, that the final discovery begins, and it begins with a simple realization: humanity has forgotten more than it remembers. You picture the ancient world as it truly was, full of scattered peoples, early seafarers' cities that rose and fell long before writing cultures that left no inscriptions or monuments. Coastlines shifted, rivers moved, islands appeared and disappeared. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived through cycles of flood, drought, fire, and volcanic eruptions. They saw continents reshape, seas rise, shores vanish, and each disaster left whispers behind. You feel this deep time stretching around you, larger than Plato's dialogues, larger than Egyptian records, larger even than archaeology's reach. A world where memories were carried not on stone or paper, but in stories, songs, and myths, fragile threads easily changed. In this vastness, the surprise settles gently on your thoughts. Perhaps the story of Atlantis is not one story, but several woven together. A memory of a drowned island, a memory of a fallen maritime empire, a memory of volcanic fire, a memory of a distant war, a memory of coastlines swallowed at the end of the Ice Age, each one incomplete, each one distorted by centuries of retelling. When Plato finally shaped them into a single narrative, he may have given form to a memory far older than he knew. But the contradictions remain. The details refuse to align neatly. Every clue points to something different. You reflect on the geological evidence: the mid-Atlantic ridge, submerged plateaus, sunken plains. None match Plato's colossal island. You recall the Bronze Age collapse, real, devastating, yet lacking the ringed harbors and golden temples of Atlantis. You remember Thera, its eruption, immense, but its geography wrong. The Minoans advanced mysterious, but not beyond the pillars of Heracles. Early explorers, hopeful, imaginative, yet never finding ruins. Strange artifacts, intriguing, but never conclusive. Modern expeditions, precise, courageous, and still empty-handed. With each piece, the sense of wonder deepens, but so does the unresolved question at the heart of it all. And that is where your thoughts begin to drift toward hypotheses that feel almost like dreams. Could Atlantis have been a coastal civilization, now submerged beneath shallow waters, erased by rising seas, 12,000 years ago? Could it have been a memory of multiple disasters compressed into a single story? Could Plato have transformed real events into moral allegory? Or could Atlantis have been entirely symbolic, a philosophical mirror reflecting human virtue and corruption? You sit at the edge of these possibilities, feeling how each one offers a partial answer, but never the full truth. The result emerges softly and unmistakably. No convincing explanation exists. Every theory has strengths. Every theory has weaknesses. None satisfies completely. And so you drift into the skeptical reflection that has always waited beneath the surface of the Atlantis story. What if Atlantis never existed? What if the story was crafted entirely for philosophical purposes, to contrast an ideal society with one corrupted by pride? What if the details were symbolic rings representing social order, metals representing moral qualities, destruction representing decay? You breathe in this possibility, feeling its calm rationality. It would explain the contradictions, the lack of evidence, the absence of corroborating sources. Plato was known for weaving parables and invented examples into his dialogues. Atlantis might be one of them, and yet something inside you hesitates. Because myths often reflect real memories, because stories rarely arise from nothing, because ancient civilizations often remember fragments of truths modern archaeology has not yet uncovered. And so another thought emerges, quiet, persuasive. What if Atlantis was not symbolic nor literal, but something in between, a symbolic retelling of real ancient events, a memory of a forgotten time reshaped into a philosophical lesson, a mixture of fact and myth? You let this idea float like a lantern on calm water. Perhaps there was once an island civilization smaller than Plato described, less advanced, but real. Perhaps it suffered a sudden disaster, earthquake, volcanic eruption, tsunami. Perhaps survivors passed down the tale. Perhaps the story grew through centuries, becoming grander, cleaner, more purposeful. And perhaps Plato, hearing a faint echo of that memory, shaped it into the Atlantis we know. No evidence proves this. No evidence disproves it. It is a possibility resting gently in the center of the unknown. And then comes the final reflection, the one that brings the entire journey full circle. What if Atlantis represents something universal, something that transcends geography or archaeology, a warning, a memory, a prophecy, a truth about civilizations themselves? Every great society believes it will last forever. Every empire assumes its power will not fade. Yet history shows that every civilization, no matter how brilliant, carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. Pride, arrogance, environmental strain, war, complacency. These forces have toppled cultures from Mesopotamia to Rome to the Maya. Atlantis, in this view, is not just a lost city. It is the story of humanity's fragile brilliance, a reminder that greatness can be washed away, a call to humility across millennia. You let this thought settle warmly in your mind. In the soft glow of night, it becomes clear that the mystery of Atlantis is powerful, not because of what we know, but because of what we don't, because it lives in the tension between memory and imagination, because it reminds us that the past is deeper, more complicated, and more mysterious than we often assume. And maybe Atlantis is exactly where it belongs, in that quiet place between myth and history, between doubt and wonder, between what is proven and what is possible. You breathe gently, allowing the story to settle, like silt drifting to the ocean floor. Atlantis remains lost, but the mystery remains alive.